I didn't destroy my life with one bad decision. I destroyed it by postponing every important one. For most of my life, later was my favorite word. It sounded harmless. Responsible, even. Later implied that I wasn't refusing, just waiting. Waiting for the right moment, the right version of myself, the right conditions. Waiting felt safer than choosing. So I waited. I told myself I was being patient. That rushing leads to mistakes. That thoughtful people take time. And for a while, that belief protected me from doubt. It allowed me to feel wise instead of afraid. But life doesn't pause while you wait. The early years were forgiving. Time felt endless then. Dreams felt flexible. If I delayed something, I could always catch up. That's what I believed. People around me made bold choices, some succeeded, some failed, and I watched, learning without participating. I called it observation. In truth, it was avoidance. Whenever an opportunity appeared, I analyzed it until the excitement faded. Whenever I felt a pull towards something meaningful, I asked myself if I was ready. The answer was always the same. Not yet. Relationships followed the same pattern. I cared, but carefully. I stayed emotionally close enough to feel connected, but far enough to remain safe. I told myself I was protecting my independence. What I was really protecting was my ability to leave without pain. I thought commitment was something you earned after certainty. I didn't realize that certainty only comes after commitment. Years passed quietly. My life looked stable from the outside. I had routines, responsibilities, a rhythm that worked. Nothing was broken enough to demand change. Nothing was good enough to demand courage. That's how postponement survives. It doesn't hurt. It numbs. The first time I noticed the cost, it was subtle. I was looking at old photos, moments that should have felt warm, and I felt strangely detached. Like I was remembering someone else's life. The memories were intact, but the emotion behind them felt distant, faded. I shrugged it off. I was just tired, I told myself. Everyone feels disconnected sometimes. But the feeling returned. Again and again. Especially at night, when distractions disappeared and my thoughts grew louder. I started asking myself questions I didn't like. What am I waiting for? When does later become never? How many chances quietly expire without asking for permission? I didn't answer them. I reached for sleep. For noise. For the next day. And the next day looked exactly like the one before it. That's when the realization began to form, slow and uncomfortable. My life wasn't moving forward. It was looping. I wasn't unhappy. That was the problem. Unhappiness pushes you to act. I was comfortable enough to stay. Safe enough to delay. Functional enough to disappear without anyone noticing. I had become an expert at almost living. Almost choosing. Almost starting. Almost becoming. The word later followed me everywhere. Later I'll try. Later I'll speak. Later I'll risk it. Later I'll change. It sounded infinite. Like a promise. But time doesn't treat later as a promise. It treats it as permission. And with every year that passed, the cost of choosing increased. Options narrowed. Energy faded. The future slowly solidified into something less flexible, less forgiving. I didn't notice it happening. No one ever does. One day, I caught myself giving advice to someone younger, telling them not to wait too long, not to be afraid, not to postpone their life. As the words left my mouth, something inside me tightened. Because I realized I was describing everything I had failed to do. That was the first moment I felt real fear. Not fear of failure. Fear of time. Fear that I had mistaken patience for wisdom, and caution for maturity. Fear that my life was quietly ending, not with tragedy, but with delay. and I still didn't know yet whether it was already too late. At some point, later stopped sounding like a plan and started sounding like an excuse. I didn't notice the shift immediately. It happened quietly, the way rust forms under paint. From the outside, everything still looked fine. I was functioning. Showing up. Meeting expectations. But inside, something had begun to decay: my sense of urgency, my belief that my life was still truly mine to shape. I started measuring time differently. Not in years or milestones, but in missed feelings. Moments when I should have felt excitement and felt nothing. Moments when I should have felt fear and felt only calculation. My emotional responses became delayed, diluted, as if they had to pass through layers of logic before reaching me. I told myself this was maturity. But maturity doesn't drain color from your life. Fear does. The first real crack appeared when I realized I was no longer afraid of missing out. I had accepted it. Opportunities came and went, and instead of feeling tension, I felt relief. Relief that I didn't have to decide. Relief that life kept moving without demanding anything from me. That relief scared me more than anxiety ever had. Because anxiety means you still want something. Relief means you've already let it go. I began to see my past as a series of pauses instead of chapters. Not failures, not disasters, just moments where something could have happened and didn't. When I traced my life backward, I didn't find dramatic mistakes. I found hesitation. Again and again. Like fingerprints left on everything I touched. The moral dilemmas surfaced slowly, disguised as practicality. Was I being responsible, or just avoiding risk? Was I patient, or just afraid of committing to a version of myself that might fail? Was I waiting for the right time, or hiding behind the idea that time was unlimited? The hardest part was admitting that no one was stopping me anymore. There was no authority to blame. No circumstance holding me hostage. The barriers were internal habits reinforced over years of delay. I had trained myself to believe that safety was the highest value. That stability mattered more than meaning. That a quiet life was automatically a good one. But quiet can also be empty. I noticed how my body reacted when I imagined my future continuing the same way. A heaviness in my chest. A slow, dull panic that didn't spike, it settled. Not panic that pushes you to run, but panic that asks you to endure. I had become someone who endured life instead of entering it. The realization hit me one evening, without warning. I was alone, doing nothing important, and suddenly felt overwhelmed by a sense of waste. Not wasted potential, that idea felt abstract. Wasted presence. Wasted days lived carefully instead of honestly. I saw my future clearly then. Not tragic. Not catastrophic. Just long. A long series of reasonable decisions. A long explanation of why nothing ever really happened. A life that would end without scandal, without collapse, and without me ever fully arriving. That vision broke something inside me. I understood then that later had stolen more from me than any single wrong choice ever could. Wrong choices teach you. Delay teaches you nothing, it only teaches you how to wait. And waiting had become my identity. I felt grief for the years I had already lost. Not dramatic grief, quiet, heavy grief. The kind that sits in your chest and asks, what did you think would happen? I tried to bargain with myself. I told myself I could start tomorrow. Next month. Next year. I told myself that recognizing the problem was already progress. That awareness counted for something. But awareness without action is just another form of postponement. When I finally understood the truth I had been avoiding, later wasn't protecting my future. It was consuming it. And if I didn't choose something soon, anything, time would finish choosing for me. The moment I finally understood the damage, nothing around me changed. The room looked the same. My life looked the same. I looked the same. That was the cruel part. Real endings don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, disguised as awareness. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. I didn't suddenly become brave. I didn't feel motivated or inspired. What I felt was something far less romantic. I felt late. Not in a dramatic, hopeless way but in a precise, unsettling one. Late to my own life. Late to decisions that should have been made when they still carried innocence instead of consequence. Late to versions of myself that now existed only as memories of possibility. I had spent so long waiting for the right moment that I had forgotten moments don't wait back. For the first time, I stopped asking what if and started asking what now. And that question didn't bring relief. It brought responsibility. Because now, there was no illusion left. No fantasy of infinite time. No comforting belief that everything could still be undone. Some things couldn't. I had to grieve that. I grieved the years I lived carefully instead of honestly. I grieved the chances that expired quietly because I assumed they would come back. I grieved the version of myself who believed that postponing pain would somehow protect joy. It doesn't. Avoided pain doesn't disappear. It matures. And one day, it asks for everything at once. I understood then that my life hadn't been ruined by fear, it had been shaped by it. Fear had made me polite, reasonable, and invisible. It had kept me from failing loudly, but also from living clearly. So I made a decision, not a dramatic one, not a cinematic one. I stopped saying later. Not forever. Not to everything. Just when it mattered. I began choosing before I felt ready. Speaking before my voice felt steady. Acting while doubt was still present. Not recklessly but honestly. I accepted that clarity comes after movement, not before it. Some choices were small. Others were terrifying. None of them felt perfect. But each one did something my waiting never had. They placed me inside my own life. I didn't suddenly become happy. Happiness isn't a switch you flip after years of delay. What I became was present. And presence changes the texture of everything. Even fear feels different when it belongs to a choice you actually made. There are still days when I look back and feel regret. Real regret. Sharp regret. Time doesn't forgive just because you finally wake up. Some doors are closed. Some paths are gone. That's the price. But there is a difference between regretting what you lost and regretting that you never tried. I no longer live with the second kind. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself, the waiting, the postponing, the quiet belief that you'll start soon, hear this without judgment. Later feels safe because it asks nothing of you today. But it takes everything from you tomorrow. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need certainty. You don't need permission. You need one honest step taken while fear is still present. Because the most devastating way a life can end is not in failure, not in loss, not in collapse, but in waiting so long that you confuse survival with living. I kept saying later until my life was almost over. I don't say it anymore. And that finally is how I began.